who are suffering through this economic crisis, where there's 100,000 homes at any time in foreclosure, where there's 500,000 people who are unemployed. We said when people realize that not just Wall Street, but all the bankers, and not just the Pentagon, but all the generals are coming to Chicago, we said people will march in their tens of thousands with their grievances. And just 2 weeks after we met, the Occupy Wall Street movement emerged, really validating our predictive powers, I think. So we went to join with the Occupy movement, and then we got a big help from the city of Chicago, because in October, when the city moved to repress Occupy and arrested 300 of them, the police, literally, as they were zip-tying people and hauling them away, said, "This is a practice run for when NATO and the G8 come to town." So all these occupiers are like, "What is NATO and the G8?" Because they're being dragged away. So we basically merged our campaign with the Occupy movement in the weeks that followed that. We first had to win. The right to protest. Mayor Rahm Emanuel threatened and vilified us. So we joined together. With our allies. Especially Occupy Chicago. To send a message. That opposing war and greed. Is not a crime. And then in December, he introduced these ordinances into the city council to greatly restrict freedom of protest. Sounds kind of familiar here in Tampa. He came up with what the Occupy movement and we dubbed the sit down and shut up ordinance. Like, take the fines for those infractions from like $50 an infraction to $1,000 for every infraction, and a bunch of other, the new laws were going to require you to register in advance any sign carried by more than one person, and to register in advance any sound system, including bullhorns. Register them before the march. When Emanuel tried to shut down protest, we went to the unions and to the community organizations and to the civil rights groups and any other group that had ever held a picket line. And we said, do you realize these laws he wants to pass, they're not just for May. These are going to be on the books forever. And everyone who's ever actually been oppressed and struggled, and that's most of us, knows that the only way you get progress is through struggle. And so we were able to unite, again, this really broad coalition, and every day the headlines in Chicago were about the protest restrictions to prepare for NATO and the G8 coming to Chicago. The name NATO and the name G8 became topics of dinner table conversations in every house in the city. Thank you again, Mayor Emanuel. By the time that those ordinances came up for a vote, we had one city council member who admitted that the morning of the vote, when he opened his email, he had 2,000 emails from community members opposing those ordinances and urging him to vote no. We were the ones who called for the march, but it was the struggle with the city that provided the education that spread our message and that won people over that basically educated people to who NATO and who the G8 were. And then when the police in Chicago brought down the repression that they brought down, both before our march and in the hour following our march, we stood behind and spoke in the defense of everyone who was being targeted by the police and by the FBI. In Chicago, we turned our closing rally over to the Iraq vets to throw their medals back at NATO.
I think the role of the veterans in throwing their medals back was quite significant, and I think the fact that they led the march was of enormous importance.
But it was worth it, to give the vets that closing thing, because it was so dramatic and so moving and so important politically.
That message that the veterans posed was quite subversive.